Jumping right into it, and with a lot of picks, we're going to go quick on some of these. For example, starting at number one with the Vegas Raiders, there's no reason to discuss Fernando Mendoza number one. That Tom Brady pairing's been made, and if you're watching this video, you have all the context you need to know why. At 36, the Raiders have got to have some offensive line additions. When you look at their needs consisting of receiver, corner, offensive line, defensive interior, the hardest to find in free agency is undoubtedly going to be the tackle spot. Any tackles of said value or caliber aren't going to make it to free agency or not be overpaid. For that reason, I went with Max Ihenachor out of Arizona State, right tackle. Migrated from Nigeria at age 13, signed with East Los Angeles Community College, weighing in the 240s. Ultimately ended up Arizona State, being in that 330-pound range now, he told me in our interview at the Senior Bowl. I think for them to have the time to finish some of that development on him, though he is technical and just very athletic, switch on and off kind of player, it also opens them up to kick Jackson Powers Johnson back into center where he belongs, and then be ready to address the guard spots later on, opposite of Colton Miller at left tackle. And then lastly, in the third round at 67, went with UGA wide receiver Zachariah Branch. Cool story narrative in the fact that his uncle is Raiders legend Cliff Branch, NFL Hall of Famer. And I understand the argument from some as far as Branch at 5'9", 177, that 50% of his target share this season was screen passes or passes within 1 to 2 yards of the line of scrimmage. Having said that, I think you could look at Ashton Genty in the fold, Brock Bowers in the fold, and understand that might be Fernando Mendoza's best friend as far as getting into the league and getting going with a security blanket. Twitched up, really strong player, 20-plus bench reps at 225. I think that's a great fit for the value early third round. Second pick, looking at the New York Jets, this is a team that knows it's going to take some time. This is an Aaron Glenn regime that knows it's going to take time. They've got multiple needs. They've got to get foundation with all these picks. They have 4 in the first 3 rounds this year, and then going into 2027 in a stacked draft class. At number 2, they made the move obvious that they're looking for a pass rusher, adding Tavondre Swift in the interior in a trade, sending off Jermaine Johnson to Robert Sala's Tennessee Titans. It's going to be David Bailey. It's going to be Arvell Reese. It's going to be Ruben Bain here. We ultimately went with Arvell Reese, linebacker edge out of Ohio State. 6'3", 241, extreme power profile. He absolutely dominated the combine. The upside is there as much as any prospect in this class. What a great start. Jumping to 16. I understand the argument for receiver. Having Garrett Wilson as your receiver one at 6 foot 185. But I also think that can be weighted on until pick 33, the way this board looks and the amount of talent in this class. Also with Adonai Mitchell in there as a receiver 2, receiver 3. For that reason, I went with Keldrick Falk, edge out of Auburn. And I know he's kind of a contested prospect in this class among the 32 teams. But for somebody to be 6'6", 275, 280, be this great of a run defender, developing as a pass rusher, the tools are there. I think in this 3-4 defense, you put him on the edge with Tavondre Sweat on the interior, and then some of their pass rushers, the likes of, say, Will McDonald. That sets yourself up going into the second round to ultimately land with where we went in Washington receiver Denzel Boston. Boston 6'4", 200 plus, got a lot of lower body control, vertical threat, kind of, though maybe the light version is kind of that Drake London archetype of receiver. I think putting him opposite of Garrett Wilson in that size we just said, with some receiver 2 expectations and bumping Adonai Mitchell down a spot as far as the depth chart for whoever the quarterback is this year, next year, and beyond, is a great foundational piece. And then lastly, as far as this 3-round mock, at pick 44, looking at the board, I think there is a run on corners. The last few picks around 1 up until the middle of the second round. Having said that, I think Keith Abney, the second out of Arizona State, is one that'd be a nice fit for Aaron Glenn. 5'9", 5'10", 195 pounds. Uh, solid in run defense, physical. The coolest factoid of this entire draft process being that he is a multi-time national champion youth speed skater. That translates to his game in terms of his ankle flexion and that overall athletic ability. Now, I think setting yourself up really well to not have a third, but be heading into day 3 on top of what we'll see in the coming days as far as free agency for the Jets there. Jumping to 3 with the Arizona Cardinals, had to think about Francis Mauigoa, tackle out of Miami at that right tackle spot opposite of left tackle Paris Johnson, former 11th overall pick out of Ohio State. Had to think about Jeremiah Love, running back out of Notre Dame, possibly the best player in this draft. Ultimately decided with this many needs, with Mike LaFleur coming in as a new head coach, not really having the luxury of already having their quarterback in place, having moved on from Kyler Murray in the last few days, letting him go for free agency. I thought it was a little luxurious to go with Love. Landed on Francis Mauigoa. As high a floor player as there is in this class, to have young bookend tackles between he and Paris Johnson, a receiving core with Michael Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. and the like, and then look for a running back later on in the draft. Thought that was too good to pass up for him there. And then coming here in the second round, decided to stay with some big men. Went with Lee Hunter, defensive tackle out of Texas Tech. 53 pressures of the quarterback this year, which was number 1 for defensive interiors, 320 plus pounds. For perspective, he had 53. Second place, Darrell Jackson Jr. out of Florida State had 44. Undoubtedly the best big man pass rusher that you're going to find in this class. I felt really good about that one. And then as far as the third round, what did we just say about Jeremiah Love? We're going to go for more of the value pick at running back, and we're going to land on my RB2, Mike Washington Jr. out of Arkansas. Yes, is it maybe a little bit of a hot take for me to say that I had him RB2 going into the combine before we saw that 4.33 40, and we saw that 10 RAS, 100th percentile athleticism, best overall complete testing we've ever had at the NFL Combine going back to 1999? Maybe so. But he was a top 5 running back for me off of the tape heading into the Senior Bowl. And like many who were there will tell you up close, his short area burst really was enough that we were all looking at each other at times saying, that's the best player on the field. At 6'1", 223, running a 4.33, that athleticism out of the backfield, to have him, Mauigoa, and then on the opposite side of the ball, that is a great start for Mike LaFleur and company heading into here in the 4th pick. And it's an easy one to say. Jeremiah Love, running back out of Notre Dame, possibly the best player in this class. What's the difference in it being a luxury for them at 4 versus the Cardinals at 3? Cam Ward. I think the fact that you've just got to get him a weapon in here. You've got other needs you can address later in the 2nd and 3rd round. But the way the board fell, I feel better about getting somebody on the other side of the ball in the 2nd than passing it up here. Love has been visiting Nashville as we record right now. I think that is just really exciting to really boost that young quarterback. And then going into the 2nd round, went with Anthony Hill Jr. out of Texas. You're talking about an outside backer with a lot of pass rushing upside and athleticism. I think Hill can go as high as the Bills in round 1 as far as a range. So I thought the first 3 or 4 picks of round 2 was a nice placeholder here with what we know now in free agency, and would also include, they've got rumblings that John Franklin Myers of the Broncos is likely coming in free agency to be opposite of Jeffrey Simmons on that defensive line. For those reasons, I think you can wait for some more defensive additions, more as far as the big men playing down linemen. And then lastly, with the 3rd round pick at 66, from my neck of the woods here in Atlanta, went with Georgia State wide receiver Ted Hurst. 6'3", 207. Really, really made himself some good stock at the NFL Combine running a 4.42. I mean, a 16, 17-yard per catch guy, and in his time at Georgia State and at Valdosta State here in Georgia. The vertical threat showed that he has NFL caliber vertical speed. I can tell you from my time at the Senior Bowl, he was the hardest interview to get there. I did ultimately walking up the stairs of the concourse after practice. one of the more fan favorite across 32 fan bases. I thought this was a great fit to add with Alec Manor and his physicality at the position, what you have remaining of Calvin Ridley, and then Shamir DK as that receiver 3, receiver 4, Pro Bowl punt returner, getting all that value out of there. Going over to John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh is going to do something fun here. And something fun as far as you've seen in the past. He's not going to worry as much as others on positional value. Having said that, you got to look at one of these Buckeyes. You got to look at Caleb Downs, safety out of Ohio State. You got to look at Sonny Styles, linebacker out of Ohio State. We ultimately went with Sonny Styles here. Went into the combine as my number one player in the draft. Left the combine as my number one player in the draft because I think he has the highest ceiling of any player in this draft. I think this guy has all pro ability. 6'4", 244, 6'3", 244, ran a 4.46, 43.5-inch vertical. His athleticism just oozes out there in the field drills and on the tape. This is one to put him behind Dexter Lawrence, behind the pass rush of Brian Burns. We'll see what happens with Kayvon Thibodeau in free agency in the coming days. I just thought that one was too good to pass up for a coach that'll do it. This is the guy that said, yeah, I'll take Kyle Hamilton at 14. Yeah, I'll wait and take a receiver in the 20s or late 20s. Think they loop back and look elsewhere in the second round. And ultimately, that is what we did at 37, taking Chris Brazzell, the second, 6'5", 200-pound receiver out of Tennessee. As fine of a whip route in the red zone as you're going to find in this class, undoubtedly. Father made it to the NFL. He's got an uncle that played in the NFL. A lot of good genes there for the Tulane transfer. Vertical speed, ran a 4.37 at that size. I think you put that opposite of Malik Neighbors and what you have coming off the injury. That's a nice aid to Jackson Dart, particularly not having a third-round pick. Likely losing Wan'Dale Robinson to free agency and then heading into day 3. Really like that one for him. The Cleveland Browns at 6. I think this one's all but about pointing to Monroe Freeling, left tackle out of Georgia. Freeling entered the combine as my tackle 1. Take that as you want. Left as my tackle 1. I do think he didn't have a stellar on-field drill. You saw some of that wide base he's still working on. Got out from under his feet just a hair. But the athletic testing was 99th percentile. Talking 6'7", 315, 34 and 3/4 inch arms. Athletic as all get out. Signed with Georgia out of the state of South Carolina at 270 pounds. To be a redshirt sophomore, has had that much of a body change in his development. A true left tackle. Does have 200 right tackle snaps in his time in Athens. But with the addition of Titus Howard in a trade here recently to go to the right tackle spot, I think you go ahead and man this down at left tackle. Like I said earlier in the episode with Malagoa, you're not going to find that in free agency without overpaying and it really not being as high of a talent as you could be getting in Freeling. Pick 24, the way the receiver board looks, you got one there. Ultimately landed with Texas A&M receiver KC Concepcion. I think one of the better guys in this class. I think, 5'11", 6 foot, 190, 195 pounds. His shiftiness in the intermediate of the field, ability to stretch everything, aid the other receivers that they're developing in that room for Shadur Sanders, along with this offensive line overhaul. That was one that got me excited, and I think is a good fit. They could have looked Omar Cooper Jr. as well, but ultimately landed with Concepcion to kind of be that Zay Flowers of what Todd Monken's coming from in Baltimore and bringing to Cleveland. And then at pick 70, their last one of these first 3 rounds, landed on Kamari Ramsey, DB out of Southern Cal. Played a lot of nickel, can play safety, a lot of versatility to a secondary that really could just use a body that can play in some different spots. Tons of production. I think he's day 1 ready to roll. And realizing I skipped the 39th pick, we'll jump back real quick. At 39, I had him going Chase Basantis, guard out of Texas A&M. One of my more favorite players in this class. Participated in all the field drills. Was a 95th, 96th percentile athlete doing so. All the size, all the pedigree, former top 50 recruit. This is a day 1 starter who fits this culture. To say you got Titus Howard at right tackle, Chase Basantis at one of these guard spots, and then Monroe Freeling at left tackle with a KC Concepcion addition and Todd Monken as your head coach. That's how you flip an offensive line. That's how you supercharge an offense that's really been stagnant. So I love this one coming out of the Browns and heading into pick 7. Having said all that, at 7 you got Dan Quinn's Washington Commanders. This one's too obvious. You got to take David Bailey, pass rusher out of Texas Tech. Particularly in this 3-4, I think that is the best fit for Bailey to play that outside backer, stand-up pass rusher role. As far as edges, was the cream of the crop. As far as speed off the ball, pressures on the quarterback, sack totals. This is just a defensive spot taken care of for them immediately, particularly to not have a second-round pick. And that carries us right there into the 3rd round and what I believe is 72nd overall in Traden Stukes, DB out of Arizona. For some reason, similar to what I said about Ramsey, all the versatility. Guy can play nickel, guy can play safety. Great pedigree in the fact his dad played at Pacific University and arena football. He's a 0-star walk-on in a program in Arizona that really signs and develops a lot of good secondary members, and we'll see that in this draft specifically. Really like that one for him, too, to just get 2 guys that I see as starters on defense and what should be the identity of their team. Yes, do they have Jaden Daniels? Yes, but need to have stacked defensive talent to then look in additions to what they can do in free agency and on day 3 here in the draft, potentially maybe looking at a linebacker body to throw in there as well. And then jumping to 8, sitting here wearing some Falcons colors for you for President of Football Matt Ryan right here in his playing days. Going to talk about Darth Vader in Louisiana, the New Orleans Saints. At 8, how do you not take your pick of the litter as far as the receiving group? And having said that, having someone to pair opposite of Chris Olave as the receiver to aid second-year quarterback Tyler Shuck with Kellen Moore calling plays. You have bookend tackles in Talise Fuaga and Kelvin Banks. Landed on Ohio State's Carnell Tate here. There's been a lot of discussion about the validity of his 40 time. Was it lower or not? I don't give a shit. I think 4.5, 4.54, even if that's the worst case scenario, was plenty. You look at the tape, he plays like a 4.4 player. Real vertical threat, opposite of Olave. That's stretching an offense for a quarterback with plenty of arm. And Shuck, there's been some discussion about Jeremiah Love. They can come back later, even if he were to be available. And we're going to touch on that in the 3rd round, but really like that there. Jumping to the 2nd at pick 42. Went with T.J. Parker, edge out of Clemson. And I preface this by saying, yes, Parker could go in the 1st round. He's like so many of those Clemson players where you're going to hear, the 2024 tape was a lot stronger than 2025. Yes, but that 2024 tape still exists, and he's still a 265-plus pounder with all that athleticism we saw at the Senior Bowl on the tape and at the Combine. The Saints like those bigger down linemen. It looks like Cam Jordan, the greatest Falcons hater of them all, and I respect that, and I salute it. It could be out the door. They just need a really good, competent body there. I think he fits that archetype as close as any on the board at that spot for them to look at it and ultimately do like that for them. Yeah, remembering now at this 3rd round spot for the Saints, Jonah Coleman, running back out of Washington. He's a favorite of mine. The Arizona transfer, I mean, you're talking about a guy with over 400 carries here in the last 3 years, over 2,600 yards, an average of 5.6 yards per carry, 30 rushing touchdowns, a 5'9", 228-pounder. And yes, I know you're impressed. I'm doing all this off the top of my head here. Real psycho energy. Man, I think he fits that style there and is somebody that will be ready to roll day 1. Incredibly productive, built like a bowling ball. I think for the value waiting to the 3rd, I really liked this for them. At 9, Kansas City Chiefs, you got to take Reuben Bain Jr. here. They got a couple of needs, and I know some people will jump the gun and go corner at 9, but you now have that 29th pick as a result of the Trent McDuffie trade. I think, like I said earlier in the video, late 1 into mid-2nd, I think is a nice run on corners for great value. We're going to touch on that there. Bain, yes, he does have 30-some-odd inch arms, being historically low in terms of combine numbers going back in the last 2 decades. But you just cut on the tape, the power profile, the production as far as pressuring the quarterback, the run defense. He's a stout football player, opposite of some guys like George Karlaftis next to Chris Jones and what they can do in free agency and with these picks they do have. You can't pass him up there at 9 the way the board fell. I really don't think so. And then jumping to 29, went with Colton Hood, corner out of Tennessee. Has the oiliest hips, in my opinion, of this corner class. A lot of good genes. Has a brother that's played DB at Colorado and UMass. His uncle is Roderick Hood, played in the NFL for about 9 years, himself as a DB. His productivity stepping in and covering for Jamad McCoy being injured this past season for the Vols. This is a day one guy to throw in that secondary. And having said throw into that secondary, at pick 40, while I think this is a floor for Emmanuel McNeil-Warren out of Toledo, I thought this was a nice placeholder as we feel out the stock growth of the safety 2 and safety 3 being him and Oregon's Dylan Thieneman. Went with him here at 40. Day one player being in that 6'3", 202 and running a 4.52. Don't get desensitized by some of these ridiculous 40 times we're seeing more and more year over year. 4.52 at that size, as technically sound as he is, always in the right spot, physical. You give him to Steve Spagnuolo alongside Colton Hood, that's money. And similarly to what we just did with the Saints in the third round, Katron Allen at running back out of Penn State. You waited to go for some higher athletic upside than what you've been having in more of your lunch pail running back and Isaiah Pacheco the last few years. Allen took over that Penn State running back room this past season, even with the athleticism of Nick Singleton. 1,300 plus rushing yards. He is a thumper, strong and pass pro, really stood out in Mobile himself. This is a day one starter for the value. I really like that sweet spot heading into pick 75 as far as the third round for the talent. Caleb Downs can't fall any further. I don't care about positional value. I don't care about the fact he didn't test at the combine. I don't care about some of the social media activity discussing where he's at. He is as high a floor a player in this class. Started for Nick Saban as a freshman at Alabama. I can remember his epic tape coming out of Mill Creek High School here in the area. Brother Josh playing for the Colts. Dad being an NFL player as well, or strong collegiate player. He is as well coached in the right position as can be for a team that was the worst tackling back end in the NFL last season and has been searching for a safety of some caliber, since letting Jesse Bates hit free agency and ultimately wind up with my Falcons here in Atlanta. Can't pass up Downs and really don't need to go that much further into him. He's kind of like Mendoza. If you're watching this video and you're interested enough to watch as far as the NFL draft, you got an idea of Caleb Downs. And that's even more why he can't fall any further. At pick 41, went with Jay Golday out of Cincinnati, linebacker. You're talking about a former edge rusher, signed with Central Arkansas as an edge out of high school. Both of his parents and his brother played collegiate basketball. Ton of athleticism there. Guy had 100-plus tackles, 3.5 sacks this past season. Tested very well in Indianapolis. I think that pass rush component to him and the athleticism to pair with figuring out what you've got in Demetrius Knight as an older year 2, year 3 linebacker you took in the second round. And then Barrett Carter, who was a 5th-round pick that you're kind of feeling out. I know there's been some frustrations. The release of Logan Wilson. I think you got to touch on linebacker somewhere. And for a guy in Golday who I think can sneak into the end of round 1, even if that is a little hot, at 41, it's too good to pass up, even with Trey Hendrickson hitting the road. I really do think so. Opposite of Shamar Stewart, and I know that's a conversation in itself for Bengals fans. And then jumping to the third round, went with Darrell Jackson Jr. out of Florida State, a mammoth. I mean, as much mammoth as you're going to find on the interior. If you kind of connect the dots to the last year or two of what the Bengals have looked at, they really want a defensive tackle. 44 QB pressures this past year. Earlier in the episode when I mentioned him in the context of Lee Hunter, for 320-plus pounders. A lot of pass rush upside. Really showed out in Mobile. I like him there for the value in addition to the picks you just had at each level. You touched on down lineman, linebacker, secondary. Heading into day 3 and what you guys will ultimately do in free agency here in the coming days. I really like that for the Bengals. And then at pick 11, the Dolphins know it's going to take time. Jeff Halfley and company took this job coming from Green Bay knowing it's going to take some time. They need talent. They have multiple needs. So having said that, you got to go foundational. And kind of like we talked about the tackles earlier, I think you take Spencer Fanow, right tackle out of Utah, had as good of an on-field workout as anybody in Indianapolis. The fluidity in his lower body, his extended starts at Utah. Funny guy, incredibly well spoken, great attitude. I think you touch on later, like right here at 43, got D'Angelo Pons in the second round, Miami native cornerback out of Indiana. He is the most popular player in the NFL draft. If you look at all 32 fan bases in discussion, he is the most popular player in this class, and justly so. 5'8.5", guy jumps 42.5 inches in the vert. Talk about making up for that a little bit. Plays the catch point like a complete dog. Has played against the best of the best, leading up to ultimately winning a national championship against Miami. Comes from Curt Cignetti. Played at JMU with Cignetti. Is a great talent find. I just think this is, for a corner room that has no bodies right now, can't pass that up for a guy that I think can go even higher than this. He's that good of a player. His cohesiveness between his upper body and his lower body in transition is as good as anyone in this class. That's a culture take right there. And then these 3 picks to round out the third round. Some of these might be a little bold, might be betting on the highest of the ceiling with these guys, but I think you do also have the cushion for some development there. Took Elijah Surratt here at the end of the third round, out of Indiana as well. Same background as Pons, don't need to repeat it. While he might be a little bit limited athletically and is a definition possession receiver, you're talking about 15 plus yards a catch in his career. You watch the tape, every time you turn around, you feel like it's a first down every catch. A lot of back shoulders, a lot of contested catches, technical in his route running. This kid's just a football player. I really like him there, particularly at receiver 1, having Jalen Waddle holding down all the crazy physical traits and the burst and the speed and some of that brand that comes with Miami. I just think this is a great addition for whoever is ultimately your quarterback going forward. And having said that, the next one I went with Penn State quarterback Drew Aller. Your general manager said it from his own mouth. You're taking a quarterback every year. So we got to put it somewhere and take him at his word. And having said that, Quinn Ewers as a former 7th rounder got some mileage out of it at the end of the year. Looking as if you are going to be releasing Tua Tagovailoa from that large contract. Got to take a swing. Having said that, you're not going to take another late day 3 that you already have in Ewers. You're not going to go for the big payday. Could they look at him, Malik Willis, as a former Packer himself? Yes, but knowing what we know now, bet on Aller at 6'5", 237. As much arm talent as anyone in this class. The kid can rip it. You saw in his workout in Indianapolis that he was getting more and more comfortable as it went on and was starting to let it loose. That's one for a team that has some time to see what they have and take a bet with multiple third-round picks. And then lastly, I had Justin Joly, tight end out of NC State. As strong of a receiving tight end in this class, and yes, it is Jolie, like Angelina, as he told me when I was asking him specifically about that Greg Jennings-like highlight of him pulling a hamstring at midfield and ultimately still scoring a touchdown this year at NC State. This guy is that gritty, that tough, developing his blocking at 6'3", 251. I think that is a really fun one to add with Surratt, to have in Jalen Waddle, with the other additions you've already made here, to have 5 picks in terms of the first 2 days of the draft. And do think it's worth noting as well on Jolie, we'll see as far as his stock, he is waiting until his pro day to ultimately test at that 6'3", 251. So I could see him even showing out even more than what we projected this spot. Dallas is real quick. 2 picks, 12 and 20. You got to get 2 starters on defense. I think at 12, the way the board falls, you got to go take your pick between Mansour Delane, Jermon McCoy as far as the corners. Went with Mansour Delane as the corner 1 on my board. Was healthy the whole year this past year. 6 foot, 187 pounds, engulfing in coverage, athletic, loose-limbed, efficient in transition. I think for a team that has watched Trayvon Diggs walk out the door, has watched Deron Bland repeatedly battle injuries, and a fan base that's ready to have more of a staple there, you can lean there versus McCoy coming off an ACL injury. I like that, and setting yourself up knowing that between those two strong safety 2 and safety 3, one of them is going to be there at 20. And ultimately, we went with Oregon safety Dylan Thieneman at that spot after absolutely stealing the combine. I mean, running a 4.36, a 4.37, 6 interceptions as a freshman at Purdue. The genes to have had 2 older brothers who also played safety at Purdue. He's the best cover 1 safety in this class in terms of handling space, but he also can come down and play the run, having a 4% missed tackle rate in his career. I mean, that is elite as a complete player at 6 foot, 201 pounds. 41-inch vert as far as rounding out that testing discussion, and then 272 tackles of production. I could see him going even higher. I could see him 18 to Minnesota, but ultimately lands here at 20 for Dallas. And feeling really good about it. I mean, that is 2 top shelf, potentially the top 2 at their position on your board. And then with the Rams, having made the trade for McDuffie, no longer having their original pick, having my Falcons pick at 13, went with Ty Simpson, quarterback out of Alabama. I think Matt Stafford, you get one more year out of him here, coming off of an MVP season. You take one more really strong run at it. But you've made enough additions. You have enough to spend in free agency in the coming days with some discussions about maybe Max Crosby to say we also are going to continue to plan for the future. They're not going to be picking high enough next year really to get in on these draft quarterbacks. This is as high as they're going to get. I think Simpson is the unanimous quarterback 2 in this class. The first half of the year, his tape was as strong as anybody in this class, even including Dante Moore out of Oregon. Very quick release. His father's the head coach at UT Martin. Love that Alabama program. I think in this McVay offense, it's a perfect fit. His camp couldn't be more excited for this year. I think you take the bet, understanding that you're looking at 29 and saying, we just locked up one of the better corners in the NFL. And then at pick 61, I want to see him take somebody for that right tackle spot that's got some high upside. Went with Caleb Tiernan out of Northwestern, 6'7 plus, 300 plus pounder. Doesn't have the longest arms, but so technical, great out in space, can get to the second level as a runner, very athletic. Some of you even mentioned, him having enough of a power profile to hang at guard, were that to be the case. I think late second round, you take that swing as well and feel really good about it. If anybody can make it happen, coming off of a Rob, haven't seen retirement, it'd be the Rams. And then at 93, I might have him a little low here, but frankly, it's March 4th, March 5th here. Joshua Josephs out of Tennessee as a 6'3", 240-pound, just straight-up edge rusher who gets after the passer. A lot of production. If he could stand out anywhere, it would be someone along the lines of him. You could even mention a Jayshon Barham out of Michigan as well. But I like Josephs in this spot, similar to kind of what you have seen them do with some other guys in that defense. But jumping over to Baltimore there at 14, I know there's been a lot of comments about Mekhi Lemon and kind of that slithery interview that he had, but look, the talent on the guy is too good. And frankly, 13 to the Rams has been a popular spot for me before making the move and not having picked 29 as far as kind of a luxury pick. The production's there is kind of an Amon-Ra St. Brown style receiver. And just as an aid to even further boost up Zay Flowers, look, your window with Lamar Jackson, you got to strike here. Making the move to let John Harbaugh go, to bring in Jesse Minter, and that who I could not be higher on as far as that hire. If I had been a Ravens fan, that would have been who I wanted. He can cash in the second, third round as far as defense. You go get a top shelf. There will be plenty of boards with Lemon as their receiver 1 here in this draft. At 14, love that for them. And, having just said that, at 45, had Missouri edge Zion Young. Shout out to Ghost Bright, my buddy on Twitter, big Ravens guy. That is his man. Thought of him when I made this pick here. This guy is 265, strong as a bull, got a hot motor. Looking at getting a fight out there, a lot of production. If anybody can get a lot out of him, it is Jesse Minter with the other pieces they do have. as far as that pass rush. I think that's somebody who could even go as early as late one. So, like I said, as far as taking Lemon, for that to be your first two picks with two picks in the top 50, yeah, that's pretty classic Ravens. And maybe a little bit of a bolder take here, doubling up. But I'm doubling up a receiver here at 80. I put Malachi Fields, receiver out of Notre Dame, 6'4 plus, 215 pounder. A lot of people were looking at the 4.6 he ran in Indianapolis when, frankly, I think that didn't so much hurt him as much as it kind of brought us to equilibrium of where he needs to be. His short to intermediate ability, he's just consuming for corners one-on-one. He is physical enough to hang with linebackers. Vertically, you see him make some of the most circus catches. He had catch of the day at Senior Bowl. He's had some of the best catches on tape this past season. To say you're then going from, Rashad Bateman's not your answer. If you haven't already realized that by now, I'll let you in on one. He's not your answer. Moving on from Hollywood Brown, Zay Flowers, Mekhi Lemon, Malachi Fields with wide receiver 3 expectations for Lamar Jackson. What did I say earlier about that window? You got to cash in. You got to cash in. You got to cash in now. You got to go for it. Then at 15, another divisional rival for my Falcons. Being the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they got to take Kenyon Sadiq. I know there's been mention of a pass rusher. I know that they could look at linebacker like a C.J. Allen. For Sadiq to test at the level of a 43.5-inch vertical, running a 4.39, to be 239 pounds, kind of in that Vernon Davis archetype of tight end. That weapon to go with, likely another year out of Mike Evans. We'll see as far as Chris Godwin. Emeka Egbuka going into year 2 with Baker Mayfield in a very winnable division that the Bucs have had for the most part the last few years outside of this year. Sadiq's just such a weapon, they got to do it. It's as simple as that. And the drop-off from tight end 1 to tight end 2 in this class is enough. The value's there that it's like, take a best player at their position in this class. And then at 46, who a lot of people in the last few weeks have had as the first-round pick for the Bucs. And we've talked about short arms here a little bit. Cassius Howell, edge out of Texas A&M. I mean, as far as a hot motor, getting after the quarterback production, he's as good as there is in this class. He just like Ruben Bain has 30-some-odd inch arms, and you're going to have to work with that. But I think at this price tag, you take the bet, man. And if anyone's going to do it, it's Jason Light, GM of the Bucs. It can get a ton out of him in there. This team fits just too perfect. And he doesn't need to fall any more than this with the production on tape. Yeah, should he maybe not be a first-rounder? Yes, but here at 45. And then for the Lions, one of, if not the most controversial prospect in this first round as far as looking across fan bases, Alabama tackle Caden Proctor. The most mammoth of a man you're going to find in this draft. It's 6'7", 350-plus pounds. But the kind of dancing bear he's taking receptions for Ty Simpson and an Alabama team. Violent, tested very well. He's incredibly agile in his lower body. I think if any team's going to be a great fit for him, it is the Lions with him opposite All-Pro right tackle Penei Sewell in that culture of Dan Campbell working with him. And what we're hearing from league circles, I just think they take the swing here, particularly with what is left of the left tackles on board. We'll see with Proctor, but I think that one is exciting in itself. And then at pick 50, what I call a CULT prospect, in that there's a lot of people high on this guy. A lot of variance, but Gabe Jacobs, edge out of Illinois, man. In terms of production, was one of the top sack getters in the last year or two in college football. His hot motor, his play style, his experience, though they play indoors, his experience playing in cold climates, I think fits into this division. I think fits into this culture. I like that opposite of Aiden Hutchinson, is particularly for the price, to not have done it in round 1. To not have a third-round pick, I think that's two guys with incredible upside that you would definitely likely see Brad Holmes and the Lions take a shot on. Then Minnesota here, and these were some, if I had to think of one team that I kind of had to think the most on, it might have been the Vikings here. 18, I went Jermod McCoy, corner out of Tennessee. I think McCoy doesn't get hurt this past season. He's likely a top 10 pick in this class. His 2024 tape was cornerback 1, caliber good. It feels like for the last couple of years, every year we go into the draft talking about a DB need.
for the Vikings. For that reason, I could have considered Dylan Thieneman here, particularly with the absence of Vikings GOAT, defensive back Harrison Smith, but went with the premium in corner, before he was gone, and anticipating that the run might wrap up at 49, which here it ultimately does for us. So went there. I think the upside is as good as could be. I've also seen some mention about Caleb Banks or a huge interior. I could understand that one. So I had to make a pick there. Went with Jermon McCoy out of Tennessee. Look, how could anyone not be excited to go play in a Brian Flores defense? McCoy would be elated. Pick 49, Jadarian Price. The most common running back 2 in this class, if you look at most people's boards. My running back 3, incredibly close as far as running back 2. Winding up there. As big of arms as you are going to find on anybody in this class. I mean, dude is cut up. Great jump cut, as you saw in on-field workouts. Tons of speed. I mean, I think for this brute style of cold weather football, to get him at a 49th pick, I love that. And particularly when you round it out, 82nd pick, Jalen Kilgore, a versatile defensive back out of South Carolina. Had the opportunity to interview him as well, along with about 15, 20 others at the Senior Bowl. And such a well-spoken guy coming out of the state of Georgia. Has played safety, played nickel. Ultimately think he, I don't know. I say that. We'll have to see. I mean, he signed with South Carolina as a safety, kicked down to nickel, just frankly, because like you said, coaches needed it. Team player. Ran a 4.4 flat. His explosiveness tested at the top of the class as well. Incredibly productive. The kid is built solid as a rock. He's in great shape. Going back to kind of like I said from McCoy, for a secondary that really just needs athletic young bodies. And they got to take shots. They got to take shots until they get this right. I think his versatility gives you an opportunity to not really screw this one up. I liked him there. And then 97, I'll admit, before you jump down my throat, this was one of the toughest of the 100 picks for me. Ultimately went with an interior in Don Corleone, the Godfather, out of Cincinnati. Just to be a placeholder, like I said, as far as the big plug in the middle of that defense. He is as wide-ass as a player as there is in this class. I thought in the last 3-4 picks of the third round with an extra third that you had. For Peter Woods, defensive tackle, to be somebody that for so long we've talked about as a top 10 talent in this class, somebody that with the upside can be 85-90% of Jalen Carter with a similar habitus and background as a top recruit. You take the shot here, and in terms of this 3-round mock draft, it's a nice placeholder at 19. Keldrick Faulk's another name I've liked here. He's already gone. C.J. Allen at linebacker is another name I like here. We'll get here too soon. But you'll see with the second-round pick, I like rounding that out there instead. But to have him next to Derek Brown as an all-pro, to have him, paired next to some young pass rushers you have in Nick Scourton and Princely Umamielen, that one's exciting for me. And for those same reasons, I'm excited to look at Josiah Trotter out of Missouri at linebacker. Obviously his father, Jeremiah Trotter, Eagles legend. His brother is currently a linebacker with the Eagles as well. This is just a strong, instinctive, fast linebacker at 51. For him to be the 4th, 5th, roughly, linebacker off the board. And for all those same reasons I just said as far as Peter Woods, I love that for the Panthers. You can't pass that up. And then lastly, at pick 83, went with the 999 RAS, the smart man out of Stanford, Sam Roush. Roush did have short arms, but outside of that, what the hell has he had wrong in this pre-draft process? Showed out with that typical build along the lines of 6'5", 255 in Mobile. Great interview. The kid can block his ass off. Physical with the ball in his hands. All that athletic upside. For us to have talked about Eli Stowers, Kenyon Sadiq, across the board, this was the top athletic performance of the tight ends at the NFL. Jumping to pick 21 here with the Steelers, going to be really interesting. With Mike McCarthy coming in as head coach, I can't let Jordan Tyson fall any further here. And I think as far as his ceiling and with a full bill of health and a great case of medicals, when you look at his downfield ability, his body control, his twitch, his gait, the way he runs. He looks like a top 5, top 7 pick. So this is kind of a floor, kind of a placeholder in terms of this mock draft, and we'll see in the next coming days if that shifts. But I liked that here. I mean, I ultimately was going to have one of these receivers for the Steelers, whether it was a Casey Concepcion, whether it was an Omar Cooper Jr. So put Tyson here to have somebody opposite of DK Metcalf. And as of now, Will Howard being the quarterback, we'll see if Aaron Rodgers comes back. We'll see if they make an addition. But too good to pass up here. And then jumping to 53, one of the most fun players in this class in terms of the tape, Keontae Scott, nickel out of Miami. I mean, this guy's violent. This guy's twitched up. He comes downhill and knock the hell out of you. The Auburn transfer. I mean, in this secondary, with what you have at this stage, of Jalen Ramsey in the back there playing that safety nickel spot. Joey Porter Jr. holding down corner one. I don't think you worry as much about the fact that Scott is a little bit of an older prospect. He comes in, hits the ground running for a team that needs to hit the ground running, and really liked that one. And then when you jumped in, this is one that's bold. This is one that's bold. And this is one that very well could be changed here if we hear Aaron Rodgers is coming back, if we see some kind of commitment to Will Howard. But if it's just Will Howard, I thought there had to be some competition in this room. Went with Taylor Green, quarterback out of Arkansas. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of Steelers fans jumping my ass. But I like that one there for him. Pretty sure the power just went out here, but it'll be okay. Going to finish up this spot. Taylor Green, a 4.37 in the 40. Guy runs like a thoroughbred racehorse. All joking aside, to have broken the quarterback vertical record by 3 inches, jumping to 43 and a half. I mean, this guy at 6'6", 230 is an athletic freak. He's got plenty of arm strength, long strides. I could really see a team like the Jets taking a swing on him if I had to pick one. So I like this as a placeholder at the 85th pick for a team that does have multiple third-rounders. Take a swing. And a nice placeholder right here before free agency. And then at 99, man, one of my favorite players in this draft, Jayshon Barham, edge rusher out of Michigan. For him to be, originally a Mike linebacker at Maryland, transition to that outside linebacker role, his first bit at Michigan, and then ultimately this year going down to edge. 6'3", 241. He's strong as hell, plays like a Tasmanian devil, tested well running low 4.6. Closes, burst. I could see him going here. I could see him going to a team like the Rams. Josiah Stewart was the name escaping me earlier, the Michigan player who had a similar trajectory, who ultimately ended with the Rams. Really glad I remembered that one off the top of my head. Just liked him here to throw in there. And again, we'll see here in the coming days as far as a Nick Herbig and what they do, or some of the other positions on defense. But I could not have him in here in the third round. The third round is my sweet spot. This first and second round, Jim Harbaugh's getting a big man on the offensive line. He's getting a big man on the defensive interior. It's a matter of, do you go a Caleb Banks, Cade McDonald in the first? Do you go a Vega Ione in the first? Do you wait till the second flip-flop? Here, could not pass up on Vega. Guard out of Penn State. I think as high a floor a player as there is in this class. Your worst case scenario, this guy's going to start in the league for 7-8 years. I think your best case scenario, this guy has all pro potential for a team that's just been snake bit by injuries. Between Rashawn Slater, between Joe Alt, Bradley Bozeman just retired at center. Going to have to see what they do in the coming days as far as Zion Johnson at a guard spot. Vega, regardless of all that, they can't pass him up here. You wait till round 2 to circle back. And that's ultimately what we did with the second round pick in Iowa State nose tackle. Dominic Orange, big citrus. This guy is a freak human being. 6'4", 325 with a strength profile to be toting a 650-pound squat, a 450-pound bench max, a 34-inch vertical. And he is the most true nose tackle in this class. If you look at snap share among true nose tackle alignment snaps, he's at 70+%, with the next guy being closer to 50%. Had him at 945 A-gap snaps, 223 B-gap for perspective over his time at Iowa State. That's day one plug, ready to roll. That is as good a scenario for those two as far as biggest, most true guard, biggest, most true nose tackle. Love that for the Chargers. And then ultimately, 86, went with Dalen Everett, corner out of Georgia, top 50 recruit, came out of IMG Academy, started 3-4 seasons worth of starts under Kirby Smart at Georgia, played his best football in the biggest, brightest games, SEC championships, national championships, really where he showed out. Good size profile. You saw him run sub 4.4. Very well spoken, all business athlete in the third round. Some concerns about him playing a little too off, allowing the underneath. Tweak that. You're going to have that strong defensive centric mindset. They've got to get a corner in that room. For the value, this is as good as it gets. And then the Eagles, Howie Roseman of them all here at 23. And this is one that's a little bit of a placeholder because we got to see there's trade talks about A.J. Brown, with the Patriots, for example. I ultimately do think he gets moved with Devonta Smith already in the building. So for that reason, wanted to put one here. Went Omar Cooper Jr. out of Indiana. You're talking the top yard after catch receiver in this stat class, a guy that is going to be a 15-yard per reception player. Great feet along the sideline, great body control around that 200-pound range, physical as hell after the catch. I loved that one, to have somebody with a little bit of thump alongside Devonta Smith, keeping it going. Were there to be an exit for some high-caliber picks. And again, a little bit of a placeholder because they could be working with more artillery here, were they to move A.J. Brown. But even if they weren't, while I don't think they'd go receiver here in the first, they're in the market for a receiver 3 because I don't imagine they're moving forward with a big plan for Jahan Dotson. So like that as a placeholder. At 54, this was, again, and this is a little bit of a placeholder draft with the Eagles, but went Eli Stowers, tight end out of Vanderbilt, who went to the combine himself, 45.5-inch vertical, 45 and a fucking half-inch vertical, my one F-bomb of the episode. This dude is athletic as all get out. Former quarterback at New Mexico State, transfer, played as well at Texas A&M, to then follow Diego Pavia to Vanderbilt, make the transition to tight end. 239 pounds, I believe, off the top of my head. I'd have to give validation. Like I said, a lot of this right here. But in this modern era of tight end with a lot of move blocking and liking him for his receiving qualities, it looks right now as if Goddard's out of town. We'll have to see. So another little bit of a placeholder. At 68, I went with an absolute athletic freak on the interior. Is the plan to keep rolling with Tyler Steen at a guard spot? They've probably got one more year of Lane Johnson at tackle, so I can understand that argument. Been some turnover. Going to have to see as far as the health and the longevity of Landon Dickerson at a guard spot. So went with Jalen Farmer, Florida transfer and Kentucky guard here. You're talking about the kind of athleticism. Had him at over 17 miles an hour at the Senior Bowl, with the second place guard being just over 16 and the third place being just over 14. Tested in a 96th percentile in Mobile. I mean, he is as well built to be in that 6'5", 312-pound range with a hot motor. Guy's got a ton of starts. This is a big rise, but this is a starting guard in the NFL. Love that there. And then at 98, went with another fan favorite. Kind of like we talked about a D'Angelo Pons. We'll talk about somebody like a Jacob Rodriguez later on. To take Bud Clark, safety out of TCU here, leaner player. But, you're talking about a guy that had, in the last two seasons, is turning into the kind of production to have 4 or 5 interceptions a season collegiately. Manning a secondary for TCU. He was a complete winner of day 3, if not the winner of day 3 at the Senior Bowl. I think if Reed Blankenship is to move on, to have him in a back end of a secondary with Andrew Makuba, kind of a similar archetype, and then playing against that nickel spot with Cooper DeJean, that's just uber athleticism, uber ball production. And talking about the Bears, and I know there's a lot of dismay right now with the Drew Dahlman retirement as far as thinking they had that center spot seen about. So we're going to have to feel that out. I think they're going to go center in free agency versus going right down to a rookie. And I do reflect that for the most part here. A little bit of a placeholder at the bottom around 3. In the most versatile lineman, I think, in terms of playing 5 spots in this class, and Brian Parker, the second out of Duke, has played tackle at Duke his entire time, but was recruited as a center. Was interviewed and quoted at the Shrine Bowl saying that he has talked with teams and told teams he's willing to play guard or center, was taking snaps there, looked very good as far as kind of being along that 6'4" and some change, 300-plus body habitus. For a team that's kind of figuring out what they want to do at left tackle, whether it's Ozzie Trapillo, whether it's Braxton Jones, obviously know what they have at right tackle, and Darnell Wright, got Joe Tooney, even though he won't be there forever, figuring out at the center spot with Dahlman. That was just a nice placeholder at 89. But going back to the original picks, at 25, went with Caleb Banks, defensive tackle out of Florida. I love the idea of a defensive interior for this class for the Bears. Grady Jarrett is rounding it out here at the end. Going to have to see in the coming days what comes of Gervon Dexter. I just think they need a plug. I think Banks has been as big a riser as any from the Senior Bowl to the Combine to now. 6'6", 330. Coming out of summer scouting was my favorite player in summer scouting. Not my best player, my favorite player in summer scouting. I love that for the value at 25. 57, A.J. Halsey, safety out of LSU. I mean, different archetype from a lot of these safeties in terms of he's got a big lower body. He's a thumper, 220-plus pounds. Guy will come downhill and knock the hell out of you. We're going to have to see what comes of Jaquan Brisker here in the next few days. I thought that was a nice placeholder pick in the late second as far as a DB. And then at 60 to have another one right there before we wrapped it out and wanting some pass rush upside, Malachi Lawrence out of Central Florida to have gone and been a 95th plus percentile athlete. No, I take that back. 99th percentile athlete in terms of relative athletic score at the Combine. You're talking about a guy with nearly 34-inch arms, 6'4", 252 pounds. He is long, 40-inch vertical, 10'10" broad. Went and hung 4.52, I believe. I'd have to get fact-checked on that. But, I mean, the speed, the 10-yard split, the production. This is a guy that closes sacks. I have said in terms of my Falcons, if we are to move on from James Pierce Jr. with all these legal issues, I think Lawrence is the closest to that in terms of body habitus, closing on the quarterback, first step, length. Josh Allen is not going to be here forever. You got to get over that hump and get a Super Bowl or give it everything you got. Joe Brady, and here's the new coach. They got to make the move to go get DJ Moore from the previous Bears pick right there. So I landed with the linebacker need at C.J. Allen out of the University of Georgia. Linebackers there, Matt Milano is aging out. To be able to contend in this division, in this conference, this is a playoff player. 6 foot, 230 pounds, green dot for the Georgia defense. I mean, this guy's out there calling plays, orchestrating it, and he's not even 21 years old yet. So much ahead of him. Guy can play downhill in the box. He can play in space. Very, very comfortable with him here. I think he could have gone as high as Carolina at 19. I think he could have gone to Dallas at 20. For him to be sitting there at 26, you take the shot knowing you've already got your receiver in the fold in DJ Moore. And then jumping to pick 91, Kieran Crawford, edge out of Auburn. Arkansas State transfer, 6'4", 255. Very lengthy, nice spin, got some pass rush move. I could have seen Omar Cooper Jr. here to the 49ers, kind of fitting their archetype of some bigger, longer receivers, wondering what they've got in terms of the fragility in Ricky Pearsall Jr. Imagine they're going to sign Juwan Jennings. But having said all that, I just don't know how you pass up on Caleb Lomu, left tackle out of Utah here. Looked so athletic. Very similar to very similar to Monroe Freeling in the fact, thinner recruit. He was 260 pounds when he signed with Utah. He is also a redshirt sophomore. He also has those more prototypical left tackle measurables, 6'6", 304, 305, little lighter than Freeling, but just so athletic. I think you put him in this Shanahan wide zone offense, And we'll see what happens with Trent Williams. There's a lot of conversation about if they can meet contract demands, but even not, Lomu can play the right tackle spot if you're not rolling with Makovitz. If you feel it out and bring him along to have him learn behind Trent Williams, I just had to have Lomu somewhere here in the late first, and this was too good to pass up. Liked him there. At 58, I did go with an edge rusher, and Danny Dennis Sutton. He was my favorite of the edge group at the Senior Bowl personally. In terms of his body habitus, is just really impressive. Looks like a classic 265, 270 plus pounder. I mean, kind of like I said earlier in the episode about the Saints and what they favor. You put him out here with a Nick Bosa, with a Michael Williams, and what you're trying to round out and get that pass rush juiced up. I think this is a guy that's as high a floor just as far as he's going to play in the NFL for multiple years. I mean, he's a former 5-star recruit, incredibly well coached out of Penn State, tested very well in Indianapolis. I think at the end of round 2, I love that. And then with the third round pick went Keelan Rutledge, a guard out of Georgia Tech. I mean, I think in this wide zone scheme, to put him in one of these guard spots in an offensive line that needs to get a little younger, needs some athletic upgrades. This dude's all football. He's got good feet. He does have a good power profile. And then at Houston, I think this might be the most fun because they got no damn offensive lineman. I know they just re-signed Trent Brown today to have as a vet in there. I know they have Ariante Ursery at left tackle. They've just sent Juice Scruggs as far as a center that didn't land for him in the trade involving David Montgomery and bringing him in to come be the running back one alongside Woody Marks. But kind of like we said earlier in the episode about you're not going to get those tackles in free agency. You know, they traded Titus Howard to that right tackle spot. We go with Blake Miller out of Clemson. I mean, 54 starts at Clemson at right tackle. This guy's 6'7", 315 kind of body habitus. I think you'd have to run him over with your car for him not to go play. And there's been, close to examples of that in his time at Clemson. All football. I've heard plenty of people that have him as a tackle 1, tackle 2, tackle 3, tackle 4, particularly at the Senior Bowl in some discussions I had. And I am first round caliber high on him. I don't think he goes any lower than, say, 36 to Vegas. So the value's there to get the stock at its best price. This is a guy that's ready to roll day one at right tackle. You have him opposite Ariante Ursery and 2 young tackles on rookie contracts. And knowing that you're turning around at pick 38 with another pick, where we ultimately went with the big beefy Caden McDonald, defensive tackle out of Ohio State, one of my more favorite players in this class, just in the fact that, yes, are you going to have to continue to develop his pass rush upside? Yes. You ain't going to have to do shit as far as his run stuffing. This is a guy that's just a 2-gapping, eat up blocks, open it up for the linebackers behind you that you have. You're talking about the best defense in football, particularly in the secondary. To have him in the middle of a Daniil Hunter and a Will Anderson, this is freak mode, man. I mean, this is the kind of guy that you have that secondary handle in the pass. Okay, we're going to try and run on you. You're not going to run through this guy. I could have understood him at 28 even. I think as far as first 2 picks, these are my 2 favorite first 2 picks of any of the teams that we've gone through thus far with these. 59 and then 69 following it up to have 4 picks in the first 2 days. Went with Connor Liu, center out of Auburn. I had pre-injury this year in October when he had this injury. I had him as a late first-round grade, having him in the conversations as far as like Jim Harbaugh's Chargers. Crazy athleticism at a center spot. All football. Guys out of Kennesaw Mountain here in my neck of the woods. Couldn't hear better things coming out of the Auburn program. Like I said, I think this is a bet for the value. I really do think at 59, this could be a full round value versus where he'd have been if he had not had this injury. You take that, particularly having landed. Excuse me. Particularly having landed on Blake Miller and Cade McDonald, and then knowing you're coming back at 69. And I don't want to say what is a bet. I want to say and what is making a strength and potential superpower and putting Genesis Smith, safety out of Arizona. Great length, great range. Needs to develop his tackling a little bit, but I think being next to Kalen Bullock, Kamari Lassiter, Jalen Petrie, and Derek Stingley
Yeah, he gonna be all right. At 69, playing with D'Amico Ryans, coming out of that Arizona program. I'm as high as I've at times had him at safety 2. I've at times had him at safety 3. Probably comfortably have him at safety 4 after just seeing the immense athleticism out of Dylan Thieneman and Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. Denver, here's kind of a fun one. I think Chris Bell out of Louisville. I know he's had the ACL injury. Before that, I had him as a lock of a first rounder. The Broncos have shown in some of their activity in free agency, in trade pursuits, that they want to go get a physical, big-bodied receiver who can go make plays. This kid can run in the 4.3s, being in that 6'3", 220 body habitus. This is taking a bet for the price and the value for a team that can afford to do it. You go get Bo Nix, another weapon. I think they're going to go get a splash running back in free agency. Sean Payton and company. You take this shot, turn around at 62 and get a steal. And I think that makes you feel even better about 30. Had Emmanuel Pregnon, guard out of Oregon. In terms of just physically looking like a freak, like get off the bus, and the other team on Friday Night Lights is like, I'm not fucking lining up across from that guy. Pregnon might be it. Southern Cal transfer over to Oregon. This guy's just a mauler. I mean, it's as simple as that. I like him to plug a spot. And then at 94, this is one of my favorite team fits and schematic fits with a play caller. Yeah, I get it. Davis Webb has taken over the play calling. This is Sean Payton's house. Michael Trigg out of Baylor. I think if you took away some past, got suspended for a game at Ole Miss, got suspended for a game at Southern Cal, has had some questions about attitude. If anybody can maintain that or tell him to cram it up his cram hole, it's Sean Payton. At 94, I think in terms of the athletic upside, and I know this is a mouthful for this to be a class with Eli Stowers, Sam Roush, Kenny and Sadiq, Eli Raridan, but I think he has as much athletic on-field upside and elusiveness as anybody in this class. I think you take that bet here as another weapon. Like I said, going back to that pick 30, could these two be a little bit of taking a bet, taking a shot? Yes, but you can do that when you're picking 30th, and let's get real. Nix doesn't get hurt. I think they're playing the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks would ultimately won it, but it's to say this is one of the best 2 or 3 teams in the league. This is one of the best 2 or 3 defenses in the league. This is one of the 2 or 3 best play callers in the league. You take the shot. And having said that about some of these better teams, we get to the Super Bowl matchup. Got Akeem Messidor out of Miami, edge rusher, who I see, the Daniel Jeremiah's, the Dan Briglers of the world having a hair higher. Totally get it. I think him being a 25, 26-year-old rookie, I want to pigeonhole him to contenders who've got these smaller, and not to say that Mike Vrabel and Drake may have a smaller window. He's a young quarterback. That's coach's dream job. I'm not saying that. Great ownership in Robert Kraft. But just to say a team that it's like, yeah, if we look up and we say we got 5 really good years out of Messidor with a 31st overall pick, and we took 5 runs at it, that's a dub. And that's why I like him here. I understand. I would have understood, they make the move potentially to get A.J. Brown as far as a receiver. So I could understand receiver. The way the board's gone, I could get that as well. But I like having this potential value of a couple picks for a team that can buy the window. I mean, to have seen him alongside Reuben Bain as a duo in the same college football season as Romello Height next to David Bailey, I mean, that's as good as it gets. I really like Messidor in the spot. Off the top of my head, I could pull some numbers, but you don't really have to hear it. If you watch college football this season, you saw both of those guys coming up on 10-sack seasons. And then at 63, I said most popular players in this class. Jennings Dunker out of Iowa, the mullet man himself. To bring him in with right tackle potential with an aging Morgan Moses at 37 years old, but also even if he were to kick inside at guard, it gives you that ability to kick Jared Wilson back to center where the hell he belongs after a rough season
at guard where he should never belong. He is a center of the 99th percentile of athleticism. Played center as a kid, played center in high school, played center at Georgia, got drafted as a center. That alignment chaps my ass more than people that talk about Will Campbell and his short arms at left tackle. I think Dunker gives that versatility there. High floor. Vrabel's going to love this guy. I love that one. And then at 95, Deion Burks. You're talking about a 5'10", 190s pounder, a Purdue transfer to Oklahoma. I mean, he tested very well in the 40, very well in the vertical, gaudy numbers, production's fantastic. At that spot, you're talking about a field spreader. And we'll see, I mean, hell, even if you were to get A.J. Brown in this trade, and let's just assume these picks are here, which they won't be, I'd still say you do this. And we're going to have to do the 3 or 4 teams that don't have a first-round pick real quick. We're going to quick hit those. But, Seattle, I think at 32, man, you see what corner of that little run at the end of first rounds there. Colton Hood we had going 29. So for that reason, we're going to go with Brandon Cease, corner out of South Carolina. 6 foot, 190 pounds, very explosive, productive. I think his best football can be ahead of him. I think obviously with Tariq Woolen heading to free agency, Devon Witherspoon's about to get a bag. Opposite, with corner 2 expectations and a Mike McDonald defense where he has that level of help around him. Love that spot at 32. 64, another very high floor player. Jeremy Bernard, receiver out of Alabama. He's been a favorite for me even at 48 for my Falcons. Just as somebody that's going to be a good receiver too in the NFL. 6'2", 204. Tested all he needed to in Indianapolis. Productive, goes up and gets the ball. Comes from Washington where he was playing alongside Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, catching from Michael Penix. Over there when they had Kalen DeBauer. I think, that's a testament to his talent. The last pick or 2 of the second round, I love that one. And then at 96, one of the most popular players that I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I was on him before it was cool. Pitt linebacker. He's what I call star, is more of that hybrid safety, hybrid linebacker. 220-pounder Kyle Lewis. I thought he looked plenty big in the Senior Bowl up close to handle the position. I think a Mike McDonald defense, this is a best-case scenario for someone of his profile like him, like a Harold Perkins Jr., to be able to be multiple. I think late third round, that's somebody with all the playmaking upside. I mean, the numbers where I think off the top of my head, this is the kind of guy that you look in the last year or two's had 200 tackles, has multiple picks, is great in coverage. If anybody can pull it off, it'd be somebody along the lines of Mike McDonald, like we've just seen him do with Nick Eamon-Warren. And then rounding it out, we can't leave out the 4 teams, my Falcons included, the brethren that don't have a first-round pick in this draft. Got to really hit that much more in the second and third round, and then even late day 3. Starting with the Colts, I've just continuously loved putting a linebacker here at this 47th pick. I very often have had Jake Golday out of Cincinnati. Today, I'm putting Jacob Rodriguez out of Texas Tech. For this guy to have played quarterback, running back, tight end, receiver at Virginia before transitioning to linebacker and transferring to Texas Tech, only to go be first-team All-American, 2-time All-Big 12, win 3 major defensive awards, and only be the 3rd person ever do it, along with Dan Morgan and Manti Te'o. As far as the Bednarik, the Nagurski, and the Butkus award, his ball production is as good as it is in this class. 7 forced fumbles, 4 interceptions this season. You saw that in Mobile. It was like every time ball was on the ground, Rodriguez forced it, scooped it up, had an interception. Can tell you he was the most popular player amongst teammates and media at the event. A great mustache on the guy. Wife is a fighter pilot. He's just got such a cool draft profile. I think for him to have gone and answered some questions as far as straight line speed, athletic ceiling, like he did in Indianapolis. Me sitting here saying he stays in Indianapolis in the second round is warranted. I love that fit for them as a day one linebacker, particularly with it looking like they are shopping Zaire Franklin. That's too good there. And then at 78, this might be a little low for Derek Moore out of Michigan, but I really needed a placehold for him as I'm feeling out some of this edge group in the second and third round. 260-pound edge out of Michigan, really strong, fiery. Got into a great fight with Max Ahinichor at the Senior Bowl. Like him here as far as adding 2 defenders in that front 7. And then kicking it over to my Falcons. Have the most interest here, obviously. At 48, this receiver room is a ghost town beyond Drake London. I mean, with the release of Darnell Mooney today, there's literally one under contract receiver beyond London and a late day 3 Illinois receiver, Casey Washington. But even having said that in the second round, the board, as we've talked in this video, the run on late 1, early to mid 2 corners, it rounds out here, and it's too good not to take Chris Johnson out of San Diego State. 6 foot, 193 pounds. As good of an off-zone coverage corner as there is in this class. Real sticky in coverage, fluid athlete, tested well, low 4.4s, strong Senior Bowl. To have corner 2 expectations opposite of A.J. Terrell with such a talented secondary back end as far as Jesse Bates and Xavier Watts going into his second year. And then even in a corner room where we'll see what comes of Mike Hughes, imagine D. Alford's back after a career best year last year. But to say that you're bumping it to where you can have rotational depth there, I think Johnson's ceiling is very high. I could see him going as high as late 1. I think this is a floor. I think consensus would say otherwise, but I imagine the league being higher. And then at 79, at this point, yes, would I like a nose tackle? Yeah. Would I like a tackle offensively to develop with veterans Caleb McGarry and Jake Matthews? Yes. But you got to get a receiver here. And I think that Skylar Bell out of UConn is a dream scenario. 5'11", 6 foot, 187, 190 pounds. Large hands, man. I mean, this guy's got like 90th percentile hands, even at just 6 feet tall. As far as a receiver class, 41 career starts. Started at Wisconsin, had 14 starts there. Biletnikoff finalist. Even before this year, he had years of 15 and 17 yards per catch. This year, 12.6 yards per catch at 101 catches, third in FBS, nearly 1,300 receiving yards, second in the FBS, and 13 touchdowns. The production's immediate. The athletic profile is immediate. To have him as the receiver 2 to Drake London and then honestly double dip in some capacity here, either in free agency with a name I like, Vikings Jalen Naylor, for example. I proposed that earlier today. This is a slam dunk. And then going to the last 2 teams, I'd hit it quick here with 2 picks for the Packers. I think at 52 and 84, you got to walk away with a corner. That room is desperate for it. And the Packers' corner profile is so interesting because they're always going to lean on bigger guys. This isn't going to be your sub 185-pound guy. This isn't going to be your 5'9" corner. It's going to be somebody with some size. At 84, I went with my guy of mine, Arkansas cornerback Julian Neal. 6'2", 203, ran 4.5. That was a fantastic number for him. Looked good in the gauntlet. Good production. He and Ted Hurst was the best matchup of the Senior Bowl, in my opinion, in one-on-ones. Guys get really physical. For a third round price, somebody that can come into that corner spot and worst case scenario fall back to safety with all the athleticism he has with the play in front of him. I just really liked him here as kind of a Packersy fit, as Brian Maffey puts it, Packersy. I like that term, and it really applies. And then at 52, it's so characteristic for the Packers to look at some defensive linemen. And the way this board fell, I thought Kristen Miller out of Georgia as a traditional 3 tech was just too good to pass up. I mean, I was really surprised to see him come into the combine at 321 pounds. That was heavier than we were familiar with him in this neck of the woods in Georgia. But I do think that range of Ravens 45, Falcons 48, Packers 52 is probably where he ultimately lines up. Really like him there. And then lastly, let's talk about the Jaguars. Love what James Gladstone has done there. Love what Liam Cohen's done there. Love what Tony Baselli's done there. They come into it with 4 picks here in the top 100, literally with the 100th pick. At 56, I had Grayson Halton, who in my earlier video highlighting going into the combine, I had as my call for one of the 2 defensive tackle guys to really make the most noise. He followed that up. For him to be 293 pounds, to go and run like he did in the 4.8s, this guy knows how to get skinny in between gaps, knows how to get after the passer, a lot of pass rush upside, but does have the size to be an asset as well for a team that needs help in the run game on the defensive interior. That value was too good to pass up, particularly after seeing Miller go right before. 81, Sam Hecht, center out of Kansas State. I'll tell you, as far as being well coached, technically sound, prepared, having a great base on him, to not be a heavier guy. I mean, I believe he's 297, 298, creeping up right on 300. This guy started as a walk-on at Kansas State, but has just shown year after year the talent. He hung very well at the Senior Bowl. I think he comes in under center for Trevor Lawrence, with an Anton Harrison, with a recent signing at left tackle, and building out that offensive line. I loved that value. 88, this was a little bit in anticipation of, I imagine, from what we're hearing, former first-round linebacker Devin Lloyd is headed to free agency. Incredible talent, and not to say you're going to match him here with an 88th pick, but I thought Deontay Lawson out of Alabama was a nice start. This is just a solid, good, well-coached football player with a ton of starts in the SEC. Has played for both Coach Saban and Coach DeBauer. I think it's just a really high-floor third-round pick, particularly for a team that has 2 of them. And then wrapping it up here, now, I know this has been 100 picks. This has been a lot in this video. For me and yourself, I went with Malik Muhammad out of Texas. And this might even be a hair low, but this was a good placeholder spot for somebody that I think is going to be a nickel in this league. About 188 pounds, physical. I heard from receivers that I've spoken with about just his technical ability and knowing how to play the position. I think for a secondary, that does have a Greg Newsome, does have some of their pieces, as far as Cisco back in the secondary, it's safety. Just throw a body in there that's versatile and has a lot of experience. And Muhammad comes from a family, it's like my cousin played in the league, my other cousin's in the league, my other cousin's in the league. We've all played corner, we've all played safety. Right here at the end of the 3rd round, this is somebody that's all business, played a huge program in Texas, and will be ready to contribute immediately for a Jags team that's ready to go and take another run at it, take the next step.